Well, howdy all, grab yourself a drink, it is time for some PathOfExile discussion. Today I wanted to put together a list of my picks of the top 8 maps of patch 3.23, but probably more important than the actual list itself is the rationale for why those maps are on this list, because chances are one or two of these are going to be maps you personally hate, and this will allow you to easily replace them with maps that you do like. So, the main factors we're going to use in this video. We want to look at loot that is specific to the map tilesets. A good example of this is divination cards. You'll see Unrequited Love on the screen at the moment. That drops in Valdo Temple, it drops in Maze map, and drops in one or two other places. But it's probably not something you're going to want to farm very often because it is a very rare drop, and you're probably better off farming the divination card 7 years bad luck instead, which is a lot more common and thus less prone to bad RNG streaks. Plus, it's in some better tilesets that have better other cards. Divination cards are a major factor, and most of the top 8 are going to be maps that have a divination card that grants one of 4 major categories of reward: Mageblood, Headhunter, Divine Orb, or Mirror Shards. We'll come to all of those in a bit. The next question is tileset navigation. Is this a map you can cleanly shield charge through, or is it a map with lots of corners? Is this a map where projectiles that you fire are going to collide with walls, or is it one where they're instead just going to keep going until they reach the limit of their distance or they strike an enemy? The next thing is agency over altars. A bit more on that in a sec, but that's going to be the synergies with Searing Exarch and Eater of World content. Next is league mechanics synergy. Is this a good map for Blight? The answer is yes if it is a cramped indoorsy map. Is this a good map for Legion? The answer is yes if it is a wide open outdoorsy map. Is this a good map for the Affliction League content? We'll come to that in a sec, but the answer is they're pretty much all the same there. Next, you want to factor in your character's own strengths and weaknesses, and this is a really important point because just because I'm going to end up saying that Burial Chambers is the best map overall in this league doesn't mean that that's going to be true for your character. As a good example here, something that's wide open like Dunes is amazing if you're playing Tornado Shot, and it's really bad if you're playing Death's Oath. Finally, we want to factor in the question of maps that are adjacent to the map you are currently running on the Atlas. There is a pretty strong bias towards getting maps that are adjacent to the one you're currently running, and this stacks with the favourite map system bias as well. So this means that you can end up in a situation where you're pretty much only ever running 2 maps. If you run, for example, Jungle Valley and Mesa, and you just keep alternating between them. Whenever you run low on Mesas, you roll up a whole bunch of Jungle Valleys and run through those. Once you ran out of those, you probably had a whole bunch of Mesas drop while you were doing that. Contrast this to maps that don't have anything good that's adjacent to them. That can be a bit more difficult to sustain maps you're wanting to run. So let's dig deeper into that agency over altars question. This is something that's been known for a while in the player base. There are 3 maps where Eldritch altars behave a little bit strangely. This is Searing Exarch and Eater of Worlds altars. Normally there are 3 options that can be chosen. There's one that affects the player and gives a generic loot reward. There's one that affects Eldritch minions and gives an Eldritch minions drop reward. And there's one that affects the map boss and that gives a map boss specific drop reward. Of these, it is usually the case that the map boss ones are the weakest. Not necessarily dumpster tier, but a bit weaker than the other 2 choices. What if you could eliminate map boss options from the altar pool entirely? Well, if you run the Arachnid Nest map, if you run the Jungle Valley map, or if you were to run the Mausoleum map, and Mausoleum's not an option because it's not on the Atlas this round, then the map boss isn't deemed to have spawned until you've entered their room. Until that point, the map boss affecting altars are not an option because the map boss hasn't spawned and therefore can't yet be modified. So this means that if you want to rig Eldritch altars in your favour, you want to be running either Arachnid Nest or Jungle Valley. I will leave the question as to which of those 2 tilesets is superior up to you. Personally though, I'm going to put Jungle Valley on the list, and I'm most certainly not putting Arachnid Nest anywhere near my top 8 list. But if you like hard to navigate, tight and enclosed spaces, then by all means swap those 2 around. A second point to make is that this is not just a case of there are 3 maps that have this quality and then there's no other maps that are worth considering. Mesa and Foundry allow you to deterministically rush straight to the map boss, kill them really fast, probably only triggering 1 Eldritch Altar on the way there, and then everything after that is going to get the benefits of the map boss option not being available. So those are worth considering in this category as well, but in my opinion, both of them are considerably worse at it than Jungle Valley is. Mesa is a great map overall though, so it's going to make the top 8. Foundry, slightly less so. Next we want to consider the Affliction League mechanic itself. Now, Affliction, in my opinion, so far, based on what's been discovered in the first week of this league, doesn't really interact much with your map choice. In my experience, it doesn't seem to be a good mechanic for farming specific divination cards. It does grant some, but it's not a massive multiplier the way that some other mechanics have been. What the Affliction League mechanic is really good for is generating a lot of unique items, generating a lot of middle tier raw currency, but not really for getting specific divination cards. This is subject to change, but for now I'm going to say that the Affliction League mechanic should have a negligible impact on your map choice. If it does impact it at all, it's that it might bias you slightly towards maps that have multiple bosses on them. For example, maps like City Square and Glacier end up slightly better, but I don't think it's a big deal. Next, there's a question of Atlas mechanic synergy. So here we're talking about past league mechanics that you've invested in on your Atlas. And this becomes more important if you're using scarabs on every map that you run. In that case, you might want to consider map layouts that play to the strengths of the mechanic you're running. For example, if you're running Legion, Dunes. Dunes is one of the best maps in the game because it's just so wide open. There's nothing obstructing your projectiles from hitting enemies. Burial Chambers is really good with the Delirium Mirror because it's long and quite linear, and the Affliction mechanic doesn't really care about map layouts at all. Then there's a question of your character's strengths. If you're playing a Death's Oath build, if you're playing a Righteous Fire build, and yes, they do still exist this league, then you can do any layout that you truly shine in tight corridors. And Waste Pool is going to be the one that really rockets to the top of your list because it's going to have one of the best divination cards in the game. Tornado Shot is the opposite. It wants open, unobstructed layouts, things like Strand or Atoll. And your choice of movement skill is a big part of this. It's not just your primary damage skill that should impact this. If you're running a shield charge setup, then you definitely want to run something like Strand because Strand is really good with shield charge and is far better than something like Shore Map. Shore Map, on the other hand, becomes quite a bit better if you're using something that lets you cross cliffs like Flame Dash or Frostblink. Okay, so let's talk about Tileset drops, divination cards and the like. The short version is that Burial Chambers is going to win on this category. This is something that is new. It used to always be Crimson Temple, but this league, the Apothecary is a bit cheaper than it's been in a while. The Doctor is a bit more expensive than it's been in a while. And also, in case you missed it, Burial Chambers gained a new divination card in the Fortunate. So it's got a small prize in the Fortunate, and then what seems to be about 100 times rarer than the Fortunate is the Doctor as the jackpot. So your S tier card, the card that has the most value based upon a combination of the card value when it drops and its rarity, is the Apothecary. In the past, this has been miles above everything else, but this league, Mageblood and Headhunter are much closer in price than they've been before. In S- tier, so a bit worse than S tier, you've got the Doctor, the Nurse, and the Patient. There's quite a lot of maps that have these now. The Doctor was added to Waste Pool a little while ago, the Nurse was added to a couple of places, I think Core is one of those maps, and the Patient's in a couple of places too. Below that, you have the A tier divination cards. These are Divine Orb cards that are Tileset drops, Brother's Gift and the Fortunate. Brother's Gift is more if you're interested in hunting a jackpot that you won't often see. The Fortunate if you want consistent, slow, steady income that really does add up. You won't get a Fortunate every map unless you juice really heavily, but even if you just Elk and Go, the card is common enough that you should get one in almost every play session. In B tier, and this is quite a bit worse than the Divine Orb cards, we have the cards that grant Mirror Shards. Now, Mirror Shard cards are worth more than Divine Orb cards in general, but they are much, much, much rarer. You have Unrequited Love, and you have 7 Years Bad Luck. Now, 7 Years Bad Luck is in a good place because there is a map that drops both it and the Apothecary, and this is Crimson Temple, and this is going to be the thing with the second best Tileset drops, but right now, Burial Chambers actually wins. Now, there's no other cards of note. It's quite a long way down from the Mirror Shard cards, and pretty much next on the list is going to be Exalted Orb cards. I wanted to quickly comment though on 3 divination cards where the drop rates are a little bit unknown, and that these might be ones that are worth investigating, although most players consider them to be inferior to the ones I've outlined before. There is the Sephira, there is Divine Beauty, and there is also the new divination card, I See Brothers. Now these provide very, very high value and very liquid rewards, but they only drop from map bosses. This means that they can't be juiced by divination scarabs, they can't be juiced by any sources of increased item quantity, whether that be related to the map mods, whether that be related to your character stats or anything like that. And really the only way that you can juice these up is by making the maps twinned. Now, most people who have tried to farm these cards have come to the conclusion that it's a little bit of a bonus to have one, but they're not particularly good and they're not particularly worth chasing. But to the best of my knowledge, no hard data has been farmed on this. Given that the Strand map drops I See Brothers, it wouldn't surprise me if there's people who try to run many thousands of Strand maps, but I'm only expecting that you'll find 1 or 2 of this card every 1,000 maps you do. All in all, on this metric, Burial Chambers wins, Crimson Temple is a reasonably close second, and then it's a long way down from there. Alright, so that's the why. Let's talk about the list itself. Number 1, Burial Chambers. This has a nasty boss. The boss is a DPS race, so you've got to keep that in mind. There's no shame in skipping this boss if you're not up to it. Just make sure that every 28th map that you do, you roll the map a bit more conservatively and you do the boss there. This has 2 of the top 3 divination card categories in one map, and it has a better than mediocre layout. Crimson Temple's close behind. Layout is worse than that of Burial Chambers, but not by much. It has the individual best divination card in the game, it has a Mirror Shard card, and it has a couple of other bonus cards that don't add up to as much as the Mirror Shard card does, but that are still there and still matter. Crimson Township also has the Apothecary, but it doesn't make the top 8 list because it doesn't have a Mirror Shard card, and it's got another really nasty boss on it. Dunes comes in 3rd for layout and its interaction with Legion. Legion's a powerful mechanic, Deadeye's the top ascendancy this league and it's not close, and with all of that in mind, I have to put Dunes in position 3. I'm putting Cemetery in position 4 as something that balances good divination cards, i.e. Brother's Gift, with a good layout, and also a very, very cruisy boss that you can easily find and easily kill. Next, I'm putting Jungle Valley and Mesa together. These are amazing for any boss rush strategy that's not destructive play oriented. If you're running destructive play, you are definitely going to favourite these, but you're going to favourite 8 other maps as well. Both of these are really good for Eldritch Altars. Both of them have the Fortunate, and most importantly, the 2 of them are adjacent to each other, which makes everything a lot easier. You can just favourite each of them 6 times, or less than 6 times when you haven't yet unlocked all 12 of your favourite map slots, and you can just bounce between them. Roll up 10 Jungle Valley maps, run them. By the time you finish that, you've probably had 10 Mesas drop, and maybe 1 or 2 Jungle Valleys. So roll up your 10 Mesas, go run those, and then you're back to having Jungle Valleys again. I'm going to put Wastepool in here as a map that gained the Doctor semi-recently. A lot of people don't realise that Wastepool did gain the Doctor a couple of leagues ago. It was in patch notes, so it has been confirmed. And it's also a layout that, while it's not good for a lot of the Deadeye type builds, it's really good on a lot of other builds. So Wastepool is definitely making this list, but it might not make your list if you're playing something like a Deadeye. And in position 8, I'm going to give that to Glacier because it's been feeling pretty good in conjunction with the Affliction mechanic, but testing on that is still in the early phases, and so I'm not absolutely rock solid on this. I'm going to give an honourable mention finally to Vaal Temple. It's its own beast, it has its own special loot. That loot is different to everything else. It drops double corrupt uniques, it drops double corrupt rare jewels, it drops a whole bunch of other weird and wonderful stuff, but the thing with Vaal Temple, it's pretty expensive at the moment because there's a Discord that's dedicated to people who are farming Vaal Temple and are optimizing strategies for farming it, and also in helping each other recognize the jackpot drops that they get. And that Discord seems to be getting a few more members, which has meant there's a bit more competition with other people outbidding each other in order to get Vaal Temples. On top of that, Vaal Temple was made considerably rarer a patch ago, and as a result, they're more expensive than they've been, but it is a very strong strategy if you're interested in playing around with it. Anyways, that's my pick for the top 8 maps for the Affliction League, plus 1 honourable mention. I'm going to leave it there. May your Valobs have interesting results.